you so much.
That was weird? Did you hear a robotic female voice there saying?
Yeah, recording in progress.
Oh, good stuff, man. Yeah, so yeah, it's so good to see you, man. By the way, if you hear like a beeping, it's the intercom for my building.
Got it.
I ordered a German doner kebab. I don't know if you know it. It's like the big thing in London right now. GDK. It's like they do these amazing like Turkish kebabs, but they're German.
Oh, nice.
And like, yeah, I remember last year I ate just that for a week because I was influenced by your Big Mac. And yeah, so if it's that, I'll just quickly need to let the guy in. I hope you don't mind when
No, bro.
ask him
I get
to bring the food, but and leave it by the door. But yeah, no. As I was saying before I started recording, Jordan, I previously I interviewed a man called Donald Robertson on this podcast, and what I said to him is that he's one of the two men who have changed my life more than anyone else, and the second man is you. You two together have been like the catalyst for my kind of philosophical and my weight loss journey. The context is that I was like 23 stone, 322 pounds back in 2017. And I'd graduated from Cambridge University like 2 years before that. And I'd gone from like being like 1 in 2,000 students on free school meals, like poor, to Cambridge Uni. And you know how it is. I mean, like you think that, oh, I'm going to be so ecstatic when I reach this like life goal of mine. And then obviously, as with anything, when you have purely external goals, it doesn't quite feel the way you expected it to. And I put on so much weight when I moved to London. And then in 2017, I discovered the philosophy of Stoicism and then started losing weight. But the way I was doing it was basically like keto and intermittent fasting. At one point, I was doing like 1 meal a day. And it was leading to what I realized when I found your content, quite disordered eating patterns. So I lost like 100 pounds in 6 months and then managed to, but the thing is, I would have put it all back on and more if it wasn't for discovering your content, because I think I'd fallen into that camp of people that thought there was something special about cutting out carbs that meant that you can then just magically eat as many calories as you want. Or, you know, I fell into the trap of having like halloumi cheese, like like fried in butter with like beef burgers fried in coconut oil in between. As if that's some kind of weight loss food. So yeah, it was yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. So yeah, I just wanted you to know how much you've influenced me, and like it's such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Man, that makes me super happy to hear. Congrats on all of your success and your hard work. It's incredible, man. I'm super happy to hear that.
Thank you, man. And of course, I'm a member of the inner circle, though I haven't been very active. I really just got it so I could support in some way because of everything that
Thank you, bro.
in terms of your content. Congratulations on your recent marriage, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
You and your partner are ultimate goals on. So how's things been recently, man?
Dude, no complaints, man. It's been good. A lot of travel. My wife and I, we had our like first marriage in Boston, like just like the legal marriage. Then we had like the fun wedding, like honeymoon and wedding in Greece. And then my buddy just got married in Atlanta and then went back to Boston this past weekend for like a big family reunion. So a lot of travel. And we're back in Dallas now, and like no travel planned for the next few months. So excited just to like be at home and in a routine and just sort of relax, and then go into the new year just refreshed.
Nice. That's awesome, man. Honestly, your pictures in Greece look so beautiful. And yeah, it's just so wonderful to talk with you today. Are you back in Dallas now, or are you
Yeah.
in?
Yep.
Cool.
Back in Dallas right now. Exactly. Yeah.
That Boston trip was quick then.
Super quick. Yeah. I mean, we left here on Friday late afternoon, and then we left Boston on Sunday morning. We were gone for like barely 48 hours.
Oh, awesome. That's crazy, man. That's crazy. All right. So in terms of this, I know that you always, it seems weird to me to even do a spiel for you because of what a big influence you've been for me. But what I'd say to people who are listening to the Stoic Teacher podcast, by the way, Jordan, my name's Sam, also known as the Stoic Teacher. Often when I'm talking with people, they're unsure whether to call, I forget to tell them my name's Sam, and they're kind of like, oh yeah, Stoic Teacher. But please do call me Sam. So my name's Sam. For anyone who hasn't seen Jordan's content before, I don't know what you're doing. If you are anyone who is interested in weight loss, which I know is a big part of my audience, Jordan is the go-to, and I regularly share quotes from him, and he's been gracious enough to kind of follow me back and comment and things like that. So I've, I'm fortunate enough to kind of know Jordan in that capacity. But Jordan, what would you give as your spiel? I know on your podcast, you often ask people to give their 60-second spiel, which is often much longer than 60 seconds. To take as long as you want. What would you give as your spiel? Because I would have plenty to say about you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a strength coach and a nutrition coach. And I think earlier on, when I first started getting involved in fitness and nutrition, I was obsessive with it, and I thought that there was a right way to do things, and that I thought there were certain foods that were going to help me get somewhere faster, and there were certain foods that I was not allowed to eat, and there were certain exercises that were good and certain exercises that were bad. I grouped things into good and bad, right and wrong, healthy and unhealthy. And the more knowledgeable I became with health and fitness, the more I realized that it's not that black and white. That it's not that there's necessarily right and wrong as much as there's a spectrum of as long as you're being consistent and mindful, then you can really achieve your goals without having to be too obsessive. And the best part about that is if you're not being overly obsessive with it, and you're not going to any extreme, you can actually sustain it and enjoy it for longer. So for me, I'm not working with professional bodybuilders. I'm not working with people who have been training for 20 years and they're jacked to the gills and on tons of supplements. I'm working with everyday people who just want to be healthier and move better and feel better and be more confident. And I think that's the vast majority of people. They want to have more access and more knowledge and understanding about how to live a healthier life and be more confident with themselves and their body. And so that's what I try and do.
That reminds me of a quote of yours that I previously shared on my page as well. You said, if the methods are unsustainable, the results will be unsustainable. And, that's what, for me, I've been through that cycle before. I realized after reading Fat Loss Forever by Layne Norton, who I know you know as well, I realized I'd been in this cycle of unsustainable methods, lose lots of weight, and then kind of not just put it back on, but overshoot and end up putting on more. It's so interesting to me because there's certain modern figures who I feel embody certain Stoic virtues. And what you were talking about there, for me, really spoke to, sometimes they call it temperance or moderation. So 2000 years ago, the Stoics were writing about the 4 key virtues, which Ryan Holiday is now talking about in his book series. And the one, he's just written about courage, but the one that really comes to mind when you were talking there is moderation. So 2000 years ago, these guys had sat down and they'd said, what's the thing that causes unhappiness? And one of the things they realized was a lack of moderation. Anything in excess or in a deficiency essentially becomes a vice when it could be a good thing. So let's say, for example, in the middle, you have courage, which is the virtue, is not particularly, taken to its excess is rashness, right? So if I'm about to walk across, if I see someone in the middle of a road, it would be brave for me to kind of wait and try and help them. But rashness would be, I see someone, I just run in the road, get myself hit, get them hit, get the people in the cars hit. But equally, a deficiency of it would be cowardice. I'm walking past, I see someone in the road who needs help, and I just walk past and don't help either. And so it seems to me that what you're espousing is this idea that moderation will ultimately lead to happiness, whereas extremes won't. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's funny. I was listening to I forget her name. I was listening to a clinical psychologist over the weekend, and she had some really interesting things to say on sort of this balance that we're talking about, right? Like, because that's really I feel like so much of life is like in this constant pursuit of balance, and whether or not you actually achieve it, I don't know if it's possible, but it's the pursuit of balance that we're sort of after. Like this moderation is another word for balance. But what she was talking about something that drug addicts often go through, where when you have a drug addict, your body and mind are always trying to find homeostasis. You're always trying to like, it doesn't want to go too far in either direction. But when you have a drug or something, you take the drug, the seesaw will tip, right? So maybe you get this massive rush of dopamine. So you do the drug, you get this, you tip the seesaw. Well, when you go on a seesaw, it doesn't just come back to normal. It has to go back the other way. And that's what happens. And so when you take that drug, you have this massive rush of dopamine and all this stuff that's like in excess. Well, once you start coming down, the seesaw tips the other way. And this is where people then go into withdrawals and they start to feel terrible. And then how do they get out of that? Well, they get out of that by taking the drug again. And they tip the seesaw again, and it gets harder and harder and harder, because every time you do that, it gets more, and the tipping of the seesaw gets more and more severe. And then you create this habit of always taking the drug whenever you need that dopamine rush, whenever you need that hit. And I think people do this in life in general. It's not just for drug addicts. I think we see this behavior in many aspects of life, even now, for something as simple as when someone's bored, what's the first thing they do? They open their phone and they go onto social media immediately, right? Like, we both picked up our phone. The first thing you do is you go, because you get cheap dopamine. You get this cheap dopamine hit of, well, I'm bored and I'm almost uncomfortable right now, just being alone with myself and not really knowing what to do. So I'm just going to go and look for a cheap dopamine hit on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever it is. And what she was talking about, I found it so interesting. She was, and it actually relates a lot to binge eating, is that the way to get through this or to overcome this seesaw and to find that homeostasis is to sit through that uncomfortable period and to wait it out, which is why people who struggle with drug addiction, they'll go to outpatient therapy, or they'll go somewhere where they have to go through these withdrawal symptoms where they do not have access to drugs, where they have to physically wait through this super uncomfortable time period before they can then sort of even out again. And it's the same thing, whether it's with fitness or with nutrition or with binge eating or whatever it is. You have to sit in this uncomfortable period and wait until you can find that balance again. So it's all of that in search of balance, in search of moderation. And I think the thing that makes it so difficult is that it can be very challenging and it can be very uncomfortable in the search for balance.
It's so interesting what you've just said, because the first thing you said spoke so much to the kind of Stoic virtue of moderation. And then what you've just said speaks to like the two. So like me and my friend Ali, I think you might know him, Ali Abdal. We made this Skillshare class on Stoicism. We made like our 5 concrete techniques. And the first 2, like what you said, speaks exactly to them. So the first one is called the dichotomy of control. And when you started mentioning addicts, it's so interesting that Alcoholics Anonymous, one of their key elements is the serenity prayer, which is this idea of, Lord, please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this idea of taking control in a situation rather than going for the easy option. And then the second element is this idea of voluntary discomfort, which I thought you put across so articulately there, which is that, you know, the Stoics were saying 2000 years ago, in order to live a happy life, we need to put ourselves in situations of voluntary discomfort. And some people hear that and they think, oh, you're saying I need to whip myself, like you're a weirdo, like what kind of pervert are you? Like, yeah, and I'm going like, just to relax, like voluntary discomfort. You know, some people will sleep on a harder surface one night a week. They might have a cold shower. They might eat a bit less. You know what? They might choose to not put the heating on. And it was viewed as like an antidote to this feeling of excessive comfort that you were describing. You know, you talked about the dopamine hits from the phone. Michael Easter, I don't know if you know him. He recently wrote a book called The Comfort Crisis.
I've heard of that book. I don't know him though. Yeah, I've heard of that book.
Yeah, he's like a professor who's like living out these experiments of like ultimate discomfort in like deserts and all these other
Mhm.
places and writing about it. And the research is so overwhelming on the fact that we live in the most comfortable time in history,
Mhm.
and yet we have the highest rates of depression and anxiety in history. um, how do we square that circle? We have and so it's so interesting to hear, because from my perspective, and I've written about this on the page, you embody many stoic virtues. And it's because Paul Carter, who I know is another friend of yours, I'm in the yoke squad of his, and he often gives a lot of, as you'll know, life and philosophical advice in our little kind of page on Train Heroic. And I often think he embodies, I mean, his and my political views couldn't be any further different. To be honest with you, I'm like a British immigrant liberal, um, and, and like the views that he espouses, I'm kind of like, my God, we couldn't be more different on these issues, and yet I absolutely love the guy. And often I think he really embodies the stoic virtues in a number of ways. Not with some of his political views. For example, the comment he made on your podcast about like eating enough on a holiday to feed an African village or something like that. And I remember hearing your bewildered laugh, just like,
Yeah.
oh God,
Did he actually say that?
yeah.
Yeah.
But
I like didn't know if I could publish that episode. I was like, I don't know if I can.
yeah, I mean, and so like, because with, but and yet some of the stuff he comes out with in terms of it embodies the stoic virtues, this idea of being a man and taking accountability, accepting our emotions. These are things that people don't associate with stoicism, even though it's the core of stoicism. People think, because the word stoic in the dictionary says like someone who represses their emotions or whatever. And that's little s stoicism. The philosophy of stoicism had heroes like Cato in ancient Rome who would cry and wail every time one of his men lost his life in battle. And Seneca tells us to trust our friends as much as we trust ourselves once we've chosen them carefully. Like that doesn't sound unemotional to me, and to me, like Paul, that's my German Doner kebab.
Go get it, bro.
I'm just gonna open the door. You know how it is in our buildings, they would bring it up to the door. It's convenient. We were just talking about excessive comfort. Here I am in my can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We were talking about excessive comfort. Here I am in my 44th floor London flat, and a guy brings my warm dinner, leaves it by my door, and then we wonder why we're getting lazy. But yeah, he'll come up in the lift and leave it there. But yeah, I was just saying he embodies for me so many aspects of stoicism. You've worked with Gary Vee before. Gary, when he was asked, what do you do when you get in a funk? He says, the thing he does is I don't know if you've spoken to him about this or if you remember this, but the thing he says, which is so interesting to me, is he visualizes getting everything he wants and then imagining that the next call he gets is to say that his mum has died. And he just says like, I don't care about that thing.
Yeah.
And the Stoics had this thing called premeditatio malorum, where they would say, actively sit and envisage, premeditate the adversity you're going to face. Because ultimately it fosters gratitude for the things that we already have and catches us before we run away with excessive desire, like we were talking about. So this is all a setup for me asking you, for me, you embody so many of these Stoic virtues. Have you explicitly come across the philosophy of Stoicism, or what is your kind of philosophical outlook? Do you have a system that you came across that made you espouse these views? Where did you come to these conclusions?
I think a lot of it comes from Jordan Peterson. Man, there's a lot. I haven't dug too much explicitly into Stoicism itself. But I think when I started watching Jordan Peterson, I really started to question a lot of the preconceived notions that I'd had before. And I think that I started to have Jordan Peterson talks about sort of like you have yourself, but then you have like the self that you can have conversations with yourself, and then you can have like conversations with yourself and then like watch from above, right? And there's like these tiers to yourself, right? And sometimes when people like just are within their own brain, they aren't having conversations with themselves, they're thinking everything they're doing is right, and it's just there's no like context, there's no battling going on. And then he said like the next level is where you can do something, you can think something, but then somewhere in your brain, you can have this conversation and completely battle with each other. And then there's another level where it's like you can actually watch from above and like watch yourself have this battle. And it's very meta and it's very odd. But I think when I started really having these debates within myself, and I would feel myself have this gut instinct or this gut response, this gut thought that something is right or something is this way. When I started to be able to question that, and I started to be able to go back and forth with myself and realize that there's so many more ways to look at life rather than just the preconceived notion that I have. That's when I started to be more open to it. And I think Jordan Peterson opened that door for me a lot.
It's so interesting you mentioned Jordan Peterson. When I interviewed Donald Robertson, so Donald Robertson's one of the kind of foremost Stoic authors, and often in the Stoic groups in the forums, a lot of people post Jordan Peterson because I think that Jordan Peterson is an example of someone who in the modern space is talking about the big philosophical questions. And I think since the pandemic, the space has opened up a lot more because a lot of people are thinking about mortality again. We kind of got checked as a as a species, I think, when that happened. But prior to that, Jordan Peterson, for me, was one of the few people that was having that public philosophical debate, which is really, really important. What was interesting to me is, unlike what I described with Paul Carter, where we can have completely different views, but I can also then appreciate him, when myself and Donald spoke about Jordan Peterson, and Donald as a psychotherapist and an academic had some points to make, which he felt that in 12 Rules for Life, he unpicked a few of the aspects and deconstructed it. And then I posted it on YouTube, and what ended up happening is I think it got posted on like a Jordan Peterson Reddit or something, and they kind of came for me thinking, oh, you know, and you have a lot more experience of this than I do.
Yeah,
I was
brutal.
But I was completely horrified on the James Smith podcast when you were talking about these forums. These hate as an aside, which I really want to come back to, but like, that was my experience of like a community finding you.
Oh yeah.
And kind of coming for you. There's been 2 times where that's happened to me. One was with Jordan Peterson. Because personally, I don't have much against Jordan Peterson himself. I do think that some of his points around he had some points about compelled speech and pronouns, which from my perspective on pronouns, what I was thinking is that it's feeding into a narrative against an oppressed group, because the transgender community in America, it seems, are really, really struggling. And I know that he was making an academic point in Canada.
Correct.
But I think that just like with Dave Chappelle, who I went to see live here the other week in London, which was an amazing show, the rhetoric is, of course, a wider academic point, but then on the ground, it can have impacts for some of these communities that are struggling. So that was one potential issue that I had with them on an academic level. But yeah, his guys just came for me for having the debate where I was saying that actually he doesn't really embody stoicism per se due to some of the points that were made. So yeah, that was really, really interesting. So it's interesting to hear you talk about him, because I do think that like some of the things about this whole idea of cleaning your room, for example, I think that we just don't have these conversations anymore. It's not really, until the pandemic, it wasn't really fashionable to be checking ourselves in the same way. You started talking about this idea of a view from above. And the thing is, the wisdom is the same wherever you look. You know, I was talking with my students. I'm like a head of year at a secondary school in South London, and I like support them with their development, and I teach them philosophy and religion as well. And I was talking to them about Jesus's quote from the New Testament. I'm not Christian, by the way, but I was talking to them about this
Yeah,
quote
yeah.
where he says, "A man who's looked lustfully at another has already committed adultery in his heart." So a man
Mm.
who's looked lustfully at another woman. And they were saying like, that's harsh, sir. You know, if I look at another girl, is that me cheating on my girlfriend type thing? And I said, the thing is, this comes from a place where people would hold themselves to a higher moral standard than we currently do.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and so
exactly right.
these conversations that you're talking about, this inner dialogue, it seems that nowadays, thanks to these things, what's more important is that if the perception is all good, it doesn't really matter what our internal monologue or dialogue is. And I think
Mm.
that's what leads to this kind of hatred that you and James were talking about on this forum. People conducting themselves in ways in cyberspace that they never really would in person. We're losing the kind of ethical element there. So I really respect Jordan Peterson for the ethical element. But yeah, on that note, on those forums, like, I'm so sorry that happened.
Bro, it's good. It's good. No, I will say, I sort of want to go back. I think it's an important discussion to have. About Jordan Peterson and the compelled speech, because that was actually what it really took me aback, and it took me a while of watching him. One of the things I really like about Jordan Peterson is how deliberate he is with his words, and watching him speak, especially um, in a very heated discussion where someone might be like, whether it's on live TV or whatever it is, like he's so careful with his choice of words, and I really appreciate and respect that. And in regard to like sort of the compelled speech discussion that he was having about the transgender community, one thing that I saw that, and I watched it a number of times, is he's very careful to say, he's like, if I have someone in my class, if they ask me to call them something, he's like, I'll call them whatever they want. He's like, I have no problem with that. Like, that's just the right thing to do. If someone asks you to refer to them a certain way, yes, and of course, absolutely. The question was about the issue of it being a legality, and there being a potential issue of like, if you don't do this, well, then you're facing legal repercussions. And I see it becoming a real, I think it's a very good point that he brings up, because at what point does, like, maybe you make a mistake. We all make mistakes when we speak. Like, we all make mistakes when we say the wrong thing. We accidentally slip up with what we say. Like, when does that become a legal issue? When does that become something, well, now you are compelled to speak how I tell you to speak? And for whatever it's worth, one of the things I really respected about him and him saying this was, I guarantee it wasn't an easy thing for him to do, but he did it anyway. And he really went against the grain. I think he really was the epitome of, I'm going to do something very uncomfortable and very scary and potentially risk my life and my career in order to stand up for what I believe to be right. And so that's really what drew me into him, is how he did what he thought was right, even though he knew he was going to get a lot of kickback.
Yeah, no, and I think that it's an interesting one from like an academic standpoint, because obviously, as educators, when we look at vulnerable groups, it's like there's obviously two sides to this, isn't there? Where, of course, you and I, we appreciate the intellectual argument being made,
Right. Yeah.
but then there's some, like the guys who came to bombard me with the comments, who take a different message from it altogether, and I think that's where the water gets a bit muddied. But ultimately, I think the important thing is that we have dialogue amongst people that disagree.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah.
I don't know if you're like, how familiar you are with, many people in America weren't really that up to date with Brexit, but like with Brexit, in our country, what ended up happening is, if you live in London or in Scotland, for example, it was like an 80 to 90% vote to remain in the European Union. But then the other parts of the country, such as the North, they were voting like that proportion the other way. And equally, like, young people were overwhelmingly voting to stay in the European Union, and then older groups overwhelmingly voted to leave. and ultimately ended up being a 51-49 split. But if you'd read my social media, it would have looked like it was 100% Remain vote, and it's because it seems like I live in an echo chamber, as does everyone else. And
Correct.
so it's really, really important for us to have discussions with people that we disagree on, because whether, to be honest, it's not just in politics that we see this, but I remember when recently this year, when there were tensions in Gaza, for example.
Yep.
I remember the onslaught that you started facing. You shared some of the anti-Semitic messages you were getting. I shared one thing, I shared a quote from Marcus Aurelius about injustice, and I talked about some of the casualties, and I mentioned the events in Gaza, and I had someone message me saying, why don't you go home to the countries where you dogs come from, like you know, and I made, you know, and I just thought, wow, like, because I know you get it on such a big scale, but the division there, it's not just in politics though. Even if you look at just the area you're in terms of the fitness space, the dogma and the division, and people just committing themselves to a stance for the sake of it, whether it be for personal gain or whatever. But like, I do believe that some of these people really feel it in their chest, you know, and they just won't hear the opposing side, no matter how much evidence is put forward. And it is worrying, isn't it, in terms of like a direction that we're going in.
Oh yeah, bro, I completely agree. I'm really sorry you got those messages. I know I've gotten messages similarly, and it always hurts, but like it's one of those things where as you go through that and you get more of them, you learn to brush it off, and you understand it's more of a them problem as opposed to you. That I don't, this doesn't have to go into a religious discussion, but I was having a conversation with my buddy actually earlier today about this. It's so interesting. Whether or not you believe in God doesn't matter to me, but I know a lot of people who they say they don't believe in God, right? They're firm atheists. Cool, that's fine. But one of the things I've noticed is whether or not you believe in an old man in the sky pointing down, like whatever, you believe in something as a higher power. And I notice this a lot especially in the fitness world, where like people will take whatever their diet is, they put it in their bio, right? It's part of their name. It's part of their identity. Like I like keto lover, or it's like, you believe in that so much. It's such a part of your identity that it's in your name on your Instagram. And then of course, any evidence that's presented contrary to that is they don't take it as, oh, maybe this is evidence against the diet. They take it as evidence against themselves, as part of their core identity to who they are and everything that they've accomplished. And anything against it is saying that they themselves are bad or not worthy or whatever. And so whether or not you believe in God religiously, you're going to find something to put on a pedestal, to believe in, to join a cult over. And so whether it's Judaism or Islam or Christianity or Buddhism, whatever it is, maybe it's not that, but maybe it's keto, or maybe it's Democrats or Republicans or whatever. You find something to divulge into and have this hierarchical, like one thing you look up to as this is it. And whether it's so funny to me, if you in life, you're going to find something that you will prop up and as your quote unquote God in some way, shape, or form. It's very interesting to me.
Do you know what, Jordan? I've been watching you for a long time, and I probably listen to every one of your podcasts, and in there will sometimes be a tangent where you're able to talk on these things, right? So when I booked in this slot with you, I was like, I need Jordan to like have the platform to just go off on these big questions, because I just, you know, I hear you talk about it here and there, but I just think that you've got such interesting perspectives on this, especially as someone who of a particular heritage, but then also just as someone who is in a particular space, it's almost like, I think you probably get the same questions all the time
Yeah.
about, you know, like, oh, how many calories should you eat for this, and so on and so forth. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's your area, right? You smash that. But I think that as a human, you have so much wisdom. And so it's really, when you said like, oh, this doesn't have to go into religion or whatever, like, please feel free, because this is what I've been wanting to hear. And I know it's what a lot of people will be wanting to hear, because I know, like, with Paul, for example, in the forum, everyone's like, oh, we need to hear you on like life stuff more again and again and again. So please, just like, when you feel it, just like go off on it, please.
Yeah.
I think what you said is so interesting, because we used to live in a time where people had like a philosophy of life, and it didn't have to be like an ism. So like, if you look at things like Taoism, Buddhism, these weren't isms. Ism is like a Western construct added to it. So like, we're now like, oh, you could be a Taoist and a Buddhist, because these were essentially philosophies of life, things that you could apply. You know, we're talking about Stoicism, you're talking about how Jordan Peterson's philosophy, we've gone through life and we've come across kind of different perspectives, and we've adopted them and we've applied them in our lives and supported us in kind of living life. It used to be the case that everyone had like it wasn't an exclusive philosophy of life, but they would like read and they would adopt certain philosophies of life as they would go through. So for example, in the Stoic school was just one amongst many others, right? Epicureans, and they all stemmed from like Aristotle, and like against the Platonic school and the Cynics. Like, Stoicism is the middle between this guy called Diogenes the Cynic, who was like very, very extreme. Like, his conclusion was the same that many have come to, which is that material possessions is what causes unhappiness. And so he was like, in that case, I don't want any material possessions. He lived on the street, he begged for food, he just like lived in a little box, and if someone would come over, he would just like, he didn't care about how people perceived him, and he thought that that was the way to be happy, right? And the Stoics were like, this guy's right, but we also have a duty to humans, and so we can't just withdraw from the world. And so they agreed with Plato in that we need to try and help people who are like stuck in Plato's kind of cave. So then they're in the middle, where it's like, you can be of the world but also like not completely buy into the world. So that's a philosophy of life. But, you know, Tim Ferriss views himself not as a Stoic but as an Epicurean. You can borrow from different philosophies of life. But what you talked about is, when we had that, we had like a grounding. It seems that now we've moved towards a system where those aren't as clear cut or obvious anymore. And so there's some things that have replaced philosophies of life. And I feel like the things you've described are those. So people look for meaning anywhere. So one of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power is to like create a cult, like, and I do view that book as like dark arts to some degree. Create like a cult like figure around you, because humans need to believe. Scientists have theorized about a God gene, where there's a gene for religion that follows us around, because evolutionarily, you know, what set us apart from animals was our ability to like create. So like, other animals could look at a lion, we could create the image of a human with a lion's head and then worship it. So what you've described is this innate human desire to like believe in something.
Yeah.
And so you talked about whether it's keto or carnivore, but also for some of the kids, it's like followers. You know,
Yes.
when I start, you know, like, I've got what, like 5,000-ish followers now. And I remember starting from zero, like during the pandemic. And I remember being like, oh, when I reach 1,000, it'll be so amazing. I'll be so happy. Like, buying into that whole thing of like, oh, followers are so great. And then you get 1,000, you don't really feel anything, you know? And I look at yours, like, what is it like? Last time I looked, it was like near 900K or something. How much are you on now?
800 right now. Yeah.
Yeah, like 800,000 people, right? And it's like, for some people, that has become their God. Everything they do is kind of for that. So I think you're absolutely right in this kind of innate requirement to like need something, because whether it's diet or whether it's training philosophy, you know, you get some people saying, oh no, don't worry about any of these bodybuilder type exercises, just do the big three. And then you get other people saying, oh, the big three are trash. And then you get, there's so much, or other people are like, HIIT is the way forward. And then other people are like, HIIT is trash. So you're absolutely right to say that ultimately everything seems to come back to this, doesn't it?
Dude, it's funny what you're talking about, especially with followers. I noticed myself getting very attached to the growth of my follower account, and that was giving me a lot of anxiety. And I don't know if you've noticed over the last, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 months, I've done very little posting on my actual Instagram feed. And that's deliberate because I realized I started just to post for the sake of growing my audience, not posting because I actually thought it was worthwhile to post, because I was actually passionate about what I was posting. I was posting because, all right, well, this is what I do in order to keep growing, which is going to help my business, which is going to keep more making money. And the more I did that, the more unhappy I got and the more anxious I got. And the more I started paying attention to those numbers all day. I say to people, don't worry about the number on the scale. Don't worry about the number on the scale. Meanwhile, I'll be worrying about the number of followers and is my account growing and all this stuff. And it's like, I'm not actually following the advice that I'm giving in another field. And that's why I stopped posting so much, because I was like, I'm doing this out of me posting on social media was me tipping the seesaw one way. Right. And then anytime I didn't post and I didn't grow my followers, that was the withdrawal symptom. And I was like, I need to sit in this so I can actually come back to here and I can find what I want to talk about and what I'm passionate about, rather than only getting this hit, getting this cheap dopamine of, here's the thing, I'm at a point now where if I want to get more followers, like I know how to do it. Like I know what to do. I know how it works. It's not difficult for me anymore. So rather than just getting that cheap dopamine hit, getting the drug of, okay, post this, get more followers, post this, get more followers, I need to be okay with not growing and actually be okay with going down, as long as I'm doing what I feel is right for me, and maybe focusing more on my wife, or focusing more on my family, or focusing more on my mental, whatever it is, focusing in on something that brings me fulfillment and I know makes me a better person, as opposed to simply getting more followers for the sake of getting more followers, getting another hit. And it's it's one of those things where I know so many people, they just want to get a bigger audience. They want to get a bigger audience. They want to grow. They want to grow. They want to grow. And they think that it's going to make them happy. And man, I can't tell you how many times, like sometimes I've just been like, I wish that I just had 0 followers. I wish I didn't have any social media. And it's not real. Like, I think the benefits far outweigh the negatives. For example, being able to have a wonderful conversation with you across the world like this wouldn't happen if something like that wasn't there. But I do think that the pursuit of followers, or the pursuit of fame, or the pursuit of notoriety for the sake of that is what's driving a tremendous amount of unhappiness and a tremendous amount of anxiety among people nowadays, because it's not normal. Like, we're not made for that. We're not made to immediately have the validation of thousands of people all over. Like, that's not how we're built. I think we're built to have a very small, tight-knit community of people, and that's it. Like, we're not supposed to immediately have the ability to have the opinion of someone around the world who we don't know and we'll never meet them, and they could just say whatever they want and just put it in our message box and say, you're a fucking piece of shit. And and all of a sudden you're really affected by that. Or on the other hand, I noticed this started to really get to me as well, you might find this weird. I wrote about this, I think in like May or April. I get messages from people, very well-meaning people, very nice, who will say, you're such an amazing person. They'll message me that, or they'll leave that in a comment. I'm like, you don't know me. Like, I've never spoken to you. Like, I make mistakes all the time. I've done bad stuff too, right? Like, every person has like the line dividing good and evil runs through the heart of every man, right? Like, we all have that. We've all made mistakes. We've all done things that we regret. So for someone who doesn't know me to come in and say, you're such an amazing human, I'm like, you're going purely based off of what you see on social media. Don't say that. Just like I can't judge someone and say someone's a bad person by solely what I see on social media, I can't say someone's a good person based on what I see on social media. And then that brings up the whole question of, can you even judge another human, right? Can you do that? Can you say, oh, that person's good and that person's bad? I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's sort of a difficult philosophical question. But that was one of the things that also started to push me away from it, because I was like, I feel like I'm feeding into this culture that perpetuates people's, like, they create this ideal image of what someone might be purely based off of the 37 seconds they see on social media, when you have no idea what that person's doing in real life. You just have no clue.
Mm. Oh, I got chills there, because it's so interesting, isn't it? I think it was Jim Carrey who said, I wish everyone would get rich and famous so they would see that it's not the answer.
Yes.
And
yes.
and it's like, we see a string of unhappy millionaires, and yet we still fall for the trick. And, you know, Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor 2000 years ago, and you see him in the Meditations. If you haven't read the Meditations, by the way, I'd highly recommend it. It's like a journal he wrote to himself. It was never intended for the public eye. So this is like the most powerful guy in the world, and he's like stressed, and he's writing to himself these like philosophical reminders. And one time he writes to himself, look, when they bring you this fish, remind yourself it's the carcass of a dead animal. Because what he didn't want was to start falling into the trap of people, everyone's kissing his butt, and him being like, yeah, like, I'm that guy. This fish is amazing. This is great. I love this robe. 2000 years ago, they were dealing with the same issue. Like in Rome, people are going to the baths, right? That was their social thing. They go to the baths and they wear their best clothes and they have their same conversation as we do today. We're trying to virtue signal on social media, present the best parts of ourselves. So this has been an age-old human question. It keeps happening. People keep being unhappy. Seneca says it's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And then elsewhere, he talks about how chasing money has been the start of trouble for many, not the end of it. Like it's basically, and then Biggie comes along and tells us more money, more problems. And then you and I are here talking about 800,000 followers and how it's like, it brings more stress than anything else. Because I remember, because there's this awkward thing, right? You must do a lot of podcasts, right? And then there's a lot of people who are making this content, and like the public line is like, I just want to help people. But the undertone is, we know that these people want to build a stream of income.
Correct.
like do you know what I mean? Like, why do I like, so, but people don't want to have the difficult conversation with themselves. And you have alluded to many times in life that you chased a certain thing and then it brought emptiness. You talk about, recently you posted that one about the six-pack. That one really hit home with me, because as a child, being like called like a fat terrorist, like that was the things people would say to me. Like, you know what it was like in the UK secondary school post 9/11, coming from a Muslim background, like the skin color was bad enough, to then be like obese on top of it, you know, coming from that kind of setting. And it's like, I want to prove them wrong. I want to get a six-pack. And even until fairly recently, that's the thing I was like chasing. And I realized, like, literally, I got to like my lowest weight ever. I hadn't been that weight since I was 13 years of age. I'm 30 now. And I hadn't been that weight until I was 30 years of age. And then the week later, I got COVID, had to isolate over Christmas. And I realized in my head, I was like, bro, you got your like six-pack. And then a week later, you can't see your family. You don't have your health. You're anemic now because of COVID. Like, is this what you wanted? Like, is this what you were chasing? Because it just felt empty. It felt empty. It was like, I chased that thing my whole life. And so it's because of like you and Stoicism that I've been able to change the mindset, where now it's like, I am at peace in myself. And that's weird. And the thing is, we never truly are, but comparatively to like where it was, do you know what I mean? Because like growing up, you think like, should I be a different race? Should I be a different size? Like, everyone telling me I'm not good enough. And so it's just interesting what you've just said, because ultimately we're all facing our little battle, but it seems that many people are chasing something that is going to make them unhappy in the long run. And the only antidote to that is a return to like what the Stoics say is that the only thing worth chasing is virtue. Because I think ultimately, if you and I make this argument, people are going to say, well, what's your answer? Like, what is it that I should be aiming towards then? Because they'll be saying, okay, well, yeah, I want to get fame and money, but what should I go for instead then? And so we have to have a response. And the Stoics' response was virtue, which is courage, justice, wisdom, and moderation. They're saying, if what you're driving towards is in the course, is pursuing justice courageously, then that's it. That's the only good. Everything else is indifferent. So they give us an answer. And now you don't have to necessarily agree with that answer, but our question would be, what should we be chasing, you know, in an age where there's so much emptiness, as it were, at the end of the journey?
Yeah, you know, man, I don't know. I don't have the answers, but here's what I do know. I was actually talking with my wife about this when we were on the plane the other day. I think one of the greatest benefits that I have with having a bigger audience and doing Q&As and speaking with so many people is I get real insight into human behavior. I get real insight into what people respond to, what people think. We always hear like the vocal minority versus the silent majority. We hear that, and I can sort of see that play out, whether it's in my comments or in my DMs or what people say. I always find it very interesting to watch on a somewhat of a large scale how people respond to me doing certain things or me posting certain things. And sometimes I'll do something just to see the response of people. And what I think what I've found that people have the best response to, and when I say best, I don't mean number of likes. I mean what the response that people will send me a heartfelt message, or a response that people will take the time to say, you don't know me, I don't know you, but when you posted this made me feel X, Y, Z way, and I want to tell you why. Like, that is how I'm sort of quantifying best, is when I just say the truth, or when I'm searching for the truth. And the truth could be about myself. The truth could be something I'm digging deeper to find the truth within myself, or I'm digging deeper to find the truth within society. That those things always have the best response, because I think you were talking about, we have this God gene, like this gene to look for something to look up. I think people have this innate desire to be the person who is courageous enough to express the truth as openly as they can, without fear of being torn down, or in today's word, being canceled. Like someone who's courageous enough to say, this is what I believe to be true, and I might be wrong, but I'm going to do everything in my power to find the truth. And I think that for me is what's sort of driving my processes as of now. Like, what's the truth? I think that the phrase, what's your truth? What's my truth? Right? It's like, sometimes I think that's a funny phrase, because like, the truth is the truth, right? But I do think there's also something said for like, well, what's true to you at this point in time? Like, what is meaningful to you? Chasing meaning, chasing purpose. And I've ironically found that the more you chase that, the more you'll also be rewarded, not just monetarily, but happiness, fulfillment. Like, the more you chase that, and the more you do the scary things, the more you are courageous to do the thing that will, that is the right thing, that you know in your heart and in your gut and your mind is the right thing, the more you'll be rewarded with happiness and fulfillment.
I love that. And I think what oozes in your, not just what you say, but like your actions as well, is this idea of service to others, right? Like all the studies that talk about happiness, and you know this, they talk about service to others makes us feel fulfilled. And I think that that just oozes from all the things that you do. Do you know what? It's such a pleasure to hear you in this space. Do you get a chance to talk about this kind of stuff often?
Not publicly. I talk about it all the time. Like, I have a few friends that I actually, so you said earlier, like, listen, I'm not Christian, but I was reading this quote from the Bible. I actually have a study group with two of my friends who are devout Catholics, and we read the Bible. And I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish, but I find it very interesting. And we sort of, we go through we talk about philosophy and we talk about how it relates to the Bible and how it relates to religion. So I talk about it a lot with my friends. I've started, I think, to discuss it a little bit more, maybe some of the ideas of it publicly, but not as much as I'd like to. So I was going to say, I would love for you to come on my podcast within the next few weeks, if you have time, because I've really enjoyed this conversation and I'd like to talk about it more. And I think someone asked me my Q&A yesterday. They were like, I didn't answer the question. They asked, can you teach critical thinking? I thought it was a really great question, because I think you can, but I don't think it is necessarily taught in the same way that you might teach math, right? I don't think critical thinking is taught in the same way that you teach science. I think critical thinking is something that you have to teach through deep discussion, even and especially if it's with ideas that you disagree with. I think you have to be comfortable facing something you disagree with, and you have to be able to dive deep into a discussion that makes you uncomfortable to really teach critical thinking. So I would love to have you on my podcast.